Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to speak with you again today. Uh, Today, my topic is the Tao of Oneness, the unseen connection. And the idea of oneness, it really is unseen. The concept I don't think is provable really in any scientific way. I think there's some hints in science, but it's not a slam dunk. So it really is sort of not easy to be aware of it. It takes practice to see it. And one of the things when I think of oneness, I often think of my experiences with the Native American spiritual practice. And one of the interesting things about Native American spiritual practice is how they look at an infant. An infant is really a wonderful thing, as it is for all of us, but especially in Native American culture, because to them they consider an infant a being that in a way is closest to the spiritual world because it's freshly from it. And that's very different from some of the Western ideas, the monotheistic religions with the idea of original sin and so forth. It's very different. And I love a lot of the things in Native American spiritual practice because it reminds me of that connection of oneness, particularly with nature. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into this now a little bit. So let me just start with the definition of oneness. The fact or state of being unified or whole, though comprised of two or more parts, the oneness of man and nature, for example. So I want to share some thoughts on oneness. Nothing exists independent of outside conditions. I mean, almost anything, or anyone for that matter that you could think of, came about because of something else. Any person you know had parents, and those parents had parents, and you can go quite far back to get to the origin. And same thing with a thing. I mean, if you look at any object in your house, like a table, it started out as a seed of a tree that eventually was shaped through circumstances into a table. So nothing exists independent of outside conditions. In other words, nothing exists in isolation. We really are. Everything and everyone is connected in some way. And of course, it's important to keep in mind that no single component is more important than the other. We work together to achieve this state of oneness, really. It's there. Often when we spend time in natural surroundings, we can experience this deep connection. I'm guessing probably almost everyone has experienced maybe some time out in nature, maybe out on a hike or someplace where the scenery is just beautiful, where you've felt this sort of unseen connection. You notice it. You feel the connection with nature. I remember years ago it happened to be I was at a friend's house standing on his balcony, and we were looking at lightning and thunder off in the distance. And just the experience of it was so powerful. I felt this just incredible connection to nature, and that's a wonderful thing. And of course, sharing time with people you love to experience that connection too. The best relationships in our lives are with the people that we care about and that care about us, and the times we share with them. It's definitely something not to take for granted, and it reinforces our connection with each other. In these moments, we transcend the narrow confines of our separate sense of self. We all have this separate sense of self. I think, it's funny if you've ever studied development and you look at children, the question sometimes comes up, well, when exactly do children become self-aware? And there's different markers that they use to test for this, but, usually the first signs of it are kind of at 8 or 9 months, and then, as we get older, our sense of self becomes stronger and stronger. And as it does, sometimes I think we tend to lose sight of the interconnectivity and the connection that we share with one another. We start to think of ourselves as separate selves, like that our consciousnesses are closed off from one another, and we feel like we only experience each other through symptoms of the body, through moving your mouth and talking, or just the entire host of nonverbal communication that we all make, virtually unconsciously for the most part. And so it's easy to sort of think that we're not connected, that we're separate entities. But I think this is a matter of faith to some extent, because like I said, I don't think it really yields itself to scientific measurement. But I think it is an illusion. We really are connected. And when we become truly present and experience fully what is actually taking place, for example, like those moments, those deep connections with nature, or those deep connections with the people that we love or are close to, what often happens is the boundaries between us and the outer world can seem to vanish. And that's really the oneness that I'm talking about, or at least the perception of that oneness. And becoming in tune with the vastness of the Tao allows us to comprehend oneness. Because really that is what connects us ultimately. It is the Tao. It's the source of everything. The thing that creates form from non-form. That really is what we're all part of and what I think binds us in many ways. So I can't help but talking a little bit about some hindrances to experiencing oneness, because it's important to be aware of those so that we can become more aware of our actual connection to each other. And so one of the things is putting material possessions and physical comfort ahead of spiritual cultivation. This is really true. We get into this, particularly with materialism, it's very easy to get sucked into this idea, which might be expressed in Western culture as keeping up with the Joneses, this race for who has the most and best stuff. And in reality, when you start to get in tune with your true self and you spend effort on spiritual cultivation, you realize that the things you own really end up owning you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having materials, possessions that are useful and helpful, but when it becomes just a competition or a race to have the best stuff or to show off or to feed your ego, that's not really a good thing, and it creates this separation that will ultimately make you unhappy no matter how much good stuff you think you have. And of course, focusing on differences can make it seem like there's this chasm between ourselves and each other. Things like race or religion or gender or country of origin or many things. I mean, human beings, we discern things, we notice differences. We're kind of hardwired to do that. When we focus on it, we fail to realize that we're all together. Ultimately, and if you could bring science in here a little bit, if you look at evolution, every living thing on this planet, every person, every plant, every flower, if you go back far enough, there's a common ancestor. In a sense, we're all cousins, we're all related. And that, again, is because of the connection we have from the source, which, of course, is the Tao. And refusing to forgive others when we feel hurt or offended, this can also create separation and makes us focus on the separation and not see the oneness. And we talked about this last week, why it's so important to forgive, and if we can get there, to even relinquish the need to forgive, which is something that's a continual process, something we have to strive for, or be patient with ourselves as we try to work together. And then, of course, lack of compassion and understanding for other beings. You encounter this a lot. I mean, when I look at, I don't want to talk too much about political things, but when I look at today's political climate and, the idea of how it's driven by fear that immigrants or Muslims or whatever are going to somehow take over or hurt our society in some way. And this is an illusion. This is driven by fear. And it really shows a lack of compassion and a lack of awareness of our connection to each other, regardless of different religions or different races or countries of origin or gender. And all these things have seemed to sort of come into the forefront lately. I just wanted to mention that it's much better to have compassion, understanding, and to realize the connection we all have. And that way we can stop hurting each other, because you don't put your hand into a fire because you know it'll burn. So if we can try to remember that, hey, we shouldn't do that to anyone. We should realize that we're all connected, and to hurt another person is to hurt yourself as well, because we really don't win unless we all win together. And then, of course, ignorance about the connection we share. And there's plenty of that goes on. And it's easy to be ignorant about it or to forget about it. I mean, some people are never taught it. They're never taught about this connection. And one of the ways to sort of feel the connection, too, is through meditation. And it's a wonderful thing that I think we should all make an effort to set time aside to practice, because it does help you feel the connection of oneness that's there. And then, of course, the three C's, as I'm calling them here: competing, complaining, and criticizing. Those things really get in the way of being. They create the separateness. You start comparing yourself to other people, what you want, and the race for the limited resources, and that really creates the separation and the illusion of separateness. And then laziness, apathy, and general lack of motivation. Spiritual work is hard. It takes practice to develop yourself, to follow the teachings, to attain that durability and that consistency that Bill was talking about. It's not something that just happens without effort. I think a lot of people with, studying the Tao think that it's non-action. You don't have to do anything. It just sort of happens magically, and it's not really the case. It can feel like magic sometimes when you're in tune with it, but it does take work. You have to work to strive for that level of understanding. And then, of course, the illusion of permanence, thinking that things that are formed will last forever. The simple truth is nothing lasts forever. I mean, if you look at everything we see on this planet and each other, I mean, just give it time. In 2 billion years, our sun will swell up to a red giant, and the temperature of this planet will be unlivable for most of the beings that live on it now. Nothing lasts forever, but what does last forever is our true selves. That isn't a form. It's the non-form, the thing that will return to the Tao when we die. That's formless. That's the thing that lasts forever. Our true selves, who we truly are. And so I wanted to put in a quote from Einstein here. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to enhance all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. I think that's a wonderful quote that sums up why it's better to focus on our interconnectivity rather than the differences. And so I wanted to just briefly sort of illustrate things a little bit by bringing up a wonderful, short little story that Derek wrote that appears in the Tao of Daily Life, and that's a conversation between waves. And what happens to the story, I'm just going to briefly summarize it. There's a small wave and a different wave, a bigger wave. And the small wave is getting discouraged. He's comparing himself to others, and he says, why am I so small? Why it's so unfair that I'm this way where all the other waves are bigger and better and leave more of a wake, leave more of a mark. And so this bigger wave, he stops by to talk to him, and he sees that there's something wrong with him. He goes, no, you don't understand. He goes, you actually are made of the same thing that I'm made of. Your smallness is just a transient state that you find yourself in. You're actually much more than a wave, just like I'm much more than a wave. And he goes, well, what do you mean? I am a wave. I have a crest, and I leave this little wake, not much of one, but there it is, and I have a trough and everything. Clearly I'm a wave. And he goes, well, again, it's a transient state that you're temporarily occupying. In reality, you're water, and you're part of something larger. Just like me, I may be a little bigger than you and so forth, but I'm water too. We're both water. We're both connected. And so he explains this to the wave, and it's a wonderful illustration of the hidden, unseen connection. So I want to start to sum it up, if I can. Oneness is counterintuitive because we're often under the illusion that we are separate from everyone, for all the reasons that I discussed. The illusion can make us feel disconnected and separate from each other, leaving a spiritual vacuum. And that's why it's important to engage in a spiritual practice, meditation, or sharing with others. I mean, us coming together every week to talk about the Tao Te Ching, and for Bill and Ed to share their experiences, it helps us experience that connection and to share with one another. And that's a good thing. It's good for our spiritual selves. Spending time in nature or with the people who love us can help us reconnect and experience oneness as well, as I discussed earlier. Cultivating the teachings of the Yiguan Tao will help us to comprehend the oneness that is always there. That unseen connection, it's always there. It depends on what our focus is, because often your focus will determine the reality that you notice. And understanding connection is important to how we treat each other, even the people we don't love, to expand our scope beyond just that. We need to be aware of the hindrances that keep us from feeling the unseen oneness that is really present. Materialism, focusing on the differences, like religion, gender, race, country of origin, refusing to forgive, and having a lack of compassion get in the way. Competing, complaining, criticizing, and apathy will increase the illusion of separation as well. Permanence is an illusion. Nothing lasts forever except the true self, which is what we all have and share. That's the thing that connects us, our true selves in this matrix of the Tao. Being compassionate will allow us to see the oneness and help us realize we are all in this together and have that sense of fellowship. So I just want to end my presentation with a quote from the Dalai Lama. If we can cultivate a concern for others, keeping in mind the oneness of humanity, we can build a more compassionate world. I think that should certainly be our goal. That's a task worth undertaking. Okay, so there it was, the Tao of Oneness, the unseen connection. Thank you so much for letting me take this time to speak with you today. I hope I said something that was helpful, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Alex, thank you. All I have to say is wow. The clarity of your expression, Alex, for me, really reveals the clarity of your thought process. And also, your talk actually leads into my talk really well. I'll be addressing the oneness, the unseen, the connectedness, the interrelated nature of all things, except from a different angle. The angle that was first described in the book, the Tao of Physics. It happens to be a question that people have asked, and many people have expressed an interest to hear more about the thought process of the ancients. We see evidence of the similarity between the Tao Te Ching and modern thoughts, modern concepts in the frontiers of physics. But what about before that? What was the thought process of the ancients that led up to it? Well, what a fascinating question that is. So I can't wait to get into that. The other quick comment, Alex, when you address the political climate, that's something that we spoke of previously as well. And I also addressed the topic and showed some cartoons, and I knew that I would be getting some pushback, and I did. So in person, I heard a comment, from someone who said, well, yeah, when I was talking about these other groups from American history, these groups of immigrants that also came into the United States and who were initially met with hostility, including people that we would not think would be subjected to that, such as the Irish. Well, they definitely were. Well, the pushback that I got was along the lines of, well, yeah, Derek, but those other groups you're talking about, they weren't trying to kill us. The implication being that the groups that we fear today, they're trying to kill us. Well, folks, that's the reason why I showed the Dr. Seuss cartoon. It's an actual cartoon from back in those days. It depicted in humorous fashion something that people thought, which was that, the Japanese Americans in this country, in Hawaii, in California, etc., they were, quote unquote, out to get us. They were, quote unquote, waiting for their chance, waiting for a signal from the homeland. So it's been many decades now. So we look back on that and we say, oh, how silly this was, how racist, how ill-informed, how ignorant, etc. We say that now, but that's not how people felt back then. So this is not to minimize the challenge that the United States met with in World War II. Let's keep in mind, the Japanese military was a feared adversary in World War II. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, we were lumping together Japanese Americans with the military adversary. So mark my words, it is now 2016, the day will come, years down the road, when we look back on today, from the vantage point of the future, and realize that our fear today towards certain groups is just as silly as the fears that we had back in those days, as depicted in the Dr. Seuss cartoon.
Yeah, Derek, I agree with you so much. Like I think you probably said this last week, what is past is prologue. We tend to repeat our mistakes, and I look forward to the day, hopefully I'll live to see it, when we look back on this time and realize how ignorant and silly those ideas were. I mean, the idea that, Muslim Americans that they're all out to kill us or something. I mean, every race or person or group of people, yeah, there's bad people in the world. That's a reality. There's people who are mired in ignorance and they don't know better. But I really think they're the minority. But we tend to focus on the bad actors. But the reality it is most Muslims in this country want to live peacefully. They want to be here to practice their religious freedom, just like Christians do, just like we do, practicing Tao cultivation. And I look forward to the day when the pattern, as you said, repeats itself, and we realize how silly that is, and it becomes, you start to think, how could that have ever happened? And I'm hopeful that will happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's not that difficult for us, as a country, because, if you think about it, we did not let Timothy McVeigh influence us into thinking that, the people from Middle America are out to get us, out to kill us. What happened in Waco, Texas, did not cause us to suddenly, feel that all Texans are out to kill us, out to cause problems, etc., etc. So I think we have it in us as a people, as Americans, to get through this historical time together.
Agreed.